This is Flipping the Script podcast, the soon-to-be #1 leadership podcast for purpose-driven leaders and great guest experts who give us a unique insight into what leadership looks like behind the scenes. I'm Shalia Stafford, your host, and I'm committed to helping you lead your challenges using leadership strategies to gain new perspectives, fuel your growth, and transform the way you execute on your success. Welcome back, everyone. It's Shalia. What are you listening to? No, I'm not talking about Chris Stapleton's song. I'm talking about the noise that comes with change. As Jim Hendrix, a famous musician, once said, knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. You see, globally, we are all sharing a common theme of change, and naturally, this can make us feel out of tune with our usual beat as we get extra noise from every direction. And just like music, we have to find the tune of our beat, but first we must understand, what are we listening for among the noise? Leadership and music do have many similarities, one including the ability to tune into ourselves and others through listening. And look, this is something that may sound so simple, but it's often misunderstood and underutilized. How can we become better listeners and refresh our understanding of the skill that we use both in life and in work? Our guest expert today, Stephen Kolher, is here as our conductor to help us dive deeper into the art of listening by sharing his leadership journey beyond the title. Stephen is Audira's founder and CEO, and he brings passion for people along with 25 years of extensive corporate experience within organizations ranging from startups to Fortune 100s across multiple industries. His credentials include an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, a BA in philosophy from Northwestern University, and he is a certified professional coach and balanced scoreboard professional. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
We are so excited to get into this and for me to practice those listening skills, right? As our conversation happens. But look, as a tradition on the show, we like to ask our guest expert fire away questions to get to know you a little bit better. Shall we fire away?
Please do.
Perfect.
Let's rock.
So tell me, Stephen, what is something that you are curious about right now?
I love the question. How we as leaders throughout society can make the most of the difficult times that we're in with COVID.
That's a great question. So what is something that you understand today about your life that you didn't understand a year ago?
That when you truly listen to your heart in terms of your passion, your purpose, anything is possible.
Okay, complete this thought. I wish I had paid more attention when...
Early on in my life, I had a passion for music and serving others and wanted to figure out how I could bring that forward.
What is something that required your patience today?
I would say something that required my patience is not trying to force things and just letting things take their own journey and own course. You know, somebody told me recently the phrase of source, don't force. And I've been thinking about that all week.
Source, don't force. I need to write that down and put it on my fridge. So what experience are you currently seeking to challenge or to support your growth as a leader?
So I'm a huge voracious learner. And one of the things I'm doing right now very practically is I'm learning to, let's call them musical exercises. One is I'm learning to sing, and the other is I'm learning how to play piano, to try to expand my listening skills, if you will, both as a creator, but also as a coach.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So if you had to break up your life up to this point in 3 chapters and give each chapter a title, what would they be?
I would say, using a musical metaphor, I would say chapter 1 is the overture or the introduction. Chapter 2 is, the awakening, and chapter 3 is the crescendo.
Let's dive a little bit deeper here, because in 2018, after 25 years of climbing the corporate ladder, you found yourself unfulfilled professionally. Tell us more about how you were able to listen to your calling and where it's led you today.
So perhaps like many of your listeners, in my journey, I got to a point where after many years of climbing in my case, the corporate ladder, chasing what I thought would fulfill me. In my case, it was a particular title, a particular role, a lot of the trappings that came along with that. I'll never forget the day I was in a meeting with a large team. We were looking at something that, in that kind of context is something you might consider very valuable and important. And I felt absolutely no fulfillment and I felt drained. And interestingly, at the same time, I had a line of people outside my door that were waiting to talk to me privately for a series of coaching mentorship conversations. And that was kind of an unofficial part of my role. And I noticed how different my energy was between, the traditional part of my role and what was the untraditional part of my role. And I had a huge shift kind of occur to me about something that I needed to change in my own life. And that then led me to a series of reflections and inward journey of identifying a shift that I wanted to bring forth, transitioning from a long career in my case, in new product development and marketing towards one that was very people focused. And with that, I transitioned full time as an executive coach and had the option to really bring in my passion for music as part of that journey as well.
Wow, so there was a lot of things that you were listening for in that moment too, because there's this passion that you knew had been on the back burner for quite a while. It was something that you were able to tap into at a young age and know that you loved it. But then it comes to a crossroads with mentoring and helping other people succeed in their roles. And how did you know at that point to bridge those two things together? And what kind of new challenges did they possibly bring on for you that weren't there before, right? As you step into a new chapter and a new season.
One of the things that I had good fortune to listen to was the inner part of me that previously, quite frankly, I had recognized I had had a narrative around it, of it being, let's say, a liability or maybe a weakness, and and that was that of empathy and listening to others. And I had an executive coach at one point in my corporate career who helped really flip the script, if you will,
Yes.
on what would it look like, Stephen, if that passion for others, that empathy, that caring were not a liability, but actually a passion and a gift that you could use for others.
Mm.
So in the moment I described a moment ago, I really started to think about what would it look like if I carried this passion and gift, if you will, of empathy and took it forward. And very practically, what I did is I started talking to a lot of individuals who had made career shifts in one way or the other. Um, Everything from teachers, and I was very focused in terms of paths that were human centered. So, teachers, therapists, counselors, coaches, facilitators. And I had just a lot of discussions with folks of all walks of life, and I listened, right? And
Yeah.
I listened to what resonated for me. And that eventually got me, in my own case, to very focused on coaching, particularly those that had perhaps had paths similar to mine. They had found their way somewhere in maybe a corporate or professional path and were struggling in some way and realizing that perhaps that path wasn't right for them. And as I
Mhm.
had the ability to start coaching with a lot of leaders, I got more and more joy out of it and such a gift of kind of supporting others in the way that I had been supported.
Right. So it sounds like you got curious.
Super curious. Yeah, I love that word. Yeah, and it's something I try to bring into my own practice every day.
And what I love that you also did is you took it a step further. So you realized that as you went into a new season of life, right? You were experiencing new experiences in
Mhm.
essence, right? New things that require new information. And so you put yourself in situations where other people had also been through a similar path as you to help guide that perspective on what to do next and maybe perhaps what it might feel like. And so I'm curious what listening meant to you when you started versus what it means to you now with the experience that you've had helping organizations and people all over the nation.
Well, I love the question, Shalea, because the art of listening is something that I spend a lot of time, not only for myself, but in supporting others. And I'll use a bit of a model to answer your question. When I started, I think like so many of us, I was at what we call level one listening, where we're not fully present. We're often fairly distracted by the world around us. Um, and I like to put that in context because we're in a world, I believe, where there's so much noise, as you mentioned in the introduction around us. We have social media. We have in the US, we have a 24/7 news cycle. Now we have obviously the challenge of COVID. And the impact on that really prevents us from truly being aware of what we may need as leaders, of what our teams may need, of what our organizations. And so that's where I started probably 2 years ago as a leader. And what I've been able to do over the last 2 years is practice deepening that listening. When we get out of level one, then we get to the next level, which is level two. And level two is when we start to get out of our own heads and start to tune into those around us. Musically, I would draw the parallel between level one is kind of when we're a solo performer. We're only focused on our own instrument. Level two, we start to transition and tune into others almost like we're in a duet or a duo. And we're aware and we're starting to do what we call call and response with another. That's good, but that's not all that we need to do. Because at level two, the challenge is sometimes we do what's called listening with the intent to respond, where we're quiet. That said, we're simply waiting to tell the other person what we think and almost convince them, right? So the final stage that I continue to practice towards and I work with my leaders on is what we call level three. And level three is when we're fully present. We're hyper curious, as you just mentioned. We're not attached to an outcome. We're fully present and we really are aware of ourselves, of the other person, and then the environment that we're in. The environment could be literally the room that we're in, or it could be maybe the customers, the audience, the community that we're in, and really trying to listen at that full sense. So that's kind of the journey I've practiced. It's an ongoing practice, and it's something that I do my best to support the leaders that I coach and facilitate, because I believe it's one of the most powerful things we can learn as a leader.
That's such a great way to explain listening. And, I'll have to say that when I was in the corporate world, I remember taking a listening class. And I kid you not, I was thinking, really? Listening? We are going to all sit around the table and we're going to practice how to listen. We're great listeners. But when the exercise started, so simple, yet it was such a complex task to get it right and get it done in a way that created the impact for the people that you care about, right? Because we were leading teams. It was a bunch of directors in the room. And we had to listen to someone else's story for 3 minutes without saying anything. And I found myself consciously at that point wanting to say, oh, I understand, or I've been there too, or no, you're doing a great job, or just wanting to fill the space with some acknowledging comments even along the way, but to just really practice letting the person start from the beginning to the end and taking in that journey that they were taking you on was such a challenging task that it made me so curious on everything I didn't understand about listening and thought I knew. And I know for many people listening, they're probably might be thinking, well, what does that look like in a practical sense? How do I know if I am tuning in at level two versus level one? How can I catch myself? What are the things I can notice if I'm between a level one or a level two to take it to the point where it creates that impact for the person who's sharing their journey or their story or whatever it is with me?
So there's a real practical tool or exercise that I like to use, and again, this is something I have to put into practice too. And it's this idea of imagine that there is, let's say, either a flashlight or maybe a microphone that is over your head, metaphorically, especially when you're in a conversation with somebody. And the exercise goes like this: as you're in that conversation with somebody, think to yourself, where is that flashlight or where is the microphone pointed? 90% of us, most of the time, if we're being really honest, that flashlight or microphone is pointed at us. Meaning, even though we might be silent and nodding our head, the flashlight is very much focused on us, of what we're thinking, what we want to say next, what we believe the other person's saying. And the opportunity we have is to repoint that flashlight or that microphone We go from level one, where it's on us, to then level two, where it's only on the other person, to finally level three, where it's shining on both of us. And we're fully present, not just on ourselves, on the other person, but the whole space around us.
Where do you think it goes wrong with how we've learned to listen?
I love the question. We are taught, and I'll put this in context, Shalia, that I think this is perhaps somewhat different depending on the culture and the world, what part of the world you're from. I know that in the US, and particularly in corporate America, we are actually given a training to not listen. We are taught and incentivized to talk, and to solve problems and to fix. And so our instinct, the second that somebody starts talking, is to immediately jump in and perhaps talk over them to tell them what we think. And immediately, without listening, we start to solve or fix the problem. And so where it goes wrong is that we have a bias towards literally starting to talk over the other person, not really understand. It's the old phrase, I think Dale Carnegie mentioned this idea, seek first to understand and then be understood. And I think we reverse that, at least in corporate America, where we start by trying to make sure the other person understands us. And that's not listening.
No, not at all. And it's interesting because when I went through that experience of really or having the awareness that listening is not what I thought it was. There was so much more in it and so much at stake, not only for the teams that I led, but then I came back home and I was like, how am I listening to my children? And how can I improve that skill set there? And it led me to a book that I believe it's called How to Listen So Your Kids Will Talk and How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen. And it is such a phenomenal guide that I saw intertwined a lot of the leadership strategies that I was learning in corporate America to how to be a conscious parent and in communicating with my children. How do you find that those aspects come out for you with your children and at home and marriage and everywhere else beyond the title?
I love that. I'm reflecting on my own patterns at home, particularly, and my intention to try to truly be fully aware and fully present in that listening you mentioned. I think one of the traps a lot of us fall into when we say we're listening, um, is that we simply, we're so wired to kind of jump and solve things that we will, as you said earlier, we'll try to jump in and say, oh, that's happened to me, and let me tell you what I did, right? And that's not real listening. The other thing we'll do is we'll confuse what I call hearing from listening. So somebody might say, oh, I heard what he or she said. He said X or she said Y, and that's very superficial. Simply
Mhm.
being able to repeat what somebody said is not deep listening. And there's kind of like three levels. I think there's being able to actually, hear the words, but then being able to articulate the impact for you without judgment or attachment, right? And then third, kind of bring it forward through curiosity, right? So a great way to kind of practice that active listening is to follow up with, this is what I heard you say. Number two, this is how it made me feel. This is the impact. And then be curious about it and say, tell me more.
I like that. That's a very practical way to go about it. Because I do find that there are some people who have started maybe perhaps in those early stages of trying to get better at listening, and they'll find themselves simply just repeating to repeat what was said. And it's, I heard you, but the next level or what the other person may be seeking too is to have a confirmation or validation that they were able to deliver what they were speaking in a way that did land on the other person.
Mm.
And so I'm curious, you said some people, instead of the seeking to understand, they want to be understood. Where do you think that comes from? Like if we had to go beyond the surface level there and really go deeper, because most of us aren't great listeners. That I know I certainly am not where I want to be. And when I think about it and I want to evaluate some of the where could it come from, why is it that we want to be understood? What's the meaning there for you?
Well, I think the question that you raised is a reflection for all of us. So in other words, we can ask ourselves, when our pattern is to maybe not truly listen, where's that coming from? And so some examples that I found for myself and for others is there's often a limiting belief. It's known by different things, of course, in leadership circles. We might call it a limiting belief or a mind trap or a saboteur. But a lot of times it comes from something that we struggle with that we then put back on the other person.
Mm.
So it might come from a limiting belief that I'm not enough. And because I'm not enough, I need to prove myself to you. And I need to demonstrate that I'm smart, that I'm capable, that I'm competent. And in order to prove that to you, I believe the best way to do that is talk at you and over you and tell you how smart I
Mm.
am, right? Or try to convince you that your perspective is wrong and I'm smart, right? That's one of a million examples. And if we can recognize whatever that limiting belief that we're starting from, let that go. And to your earlier point, approach the conversation with curiosity and empathy
Mm.
and very practically say, what might I learn from this other incredible human? What might I learn? What's possible? Letting go of whatever limiting belief I have, that then prevents us from having to have all of that baggage, right? And we're like, oh my God, what can I learn? Like, and it then leads us to a place of curiosity.
I can see that. And, I'm curious, when was a time where you realized, you know what, I'm not listening to understand versus to be understood? What did
Mm.
that look like for you?
I've done a lot of work myself, and again, I'm still on my own journey, and I can translate when I get triggered. So triggered,
Mm.
as your listeners know, is kind of a general word for when we get emotional. We might get frustrated, we might get defensive, um, we might feel rushed. So a very common thing that will trigger me is time. One of my traps is I will start to feel very anxious around time if I feel I'm running late. And the reason that translates to listening is I know when I start to feel triggered around time, I really stop listening. So, in a very practical example, let's say I'm at home and I'm trying to rush the kids out the door.
Yeah.
Um, I am not the best listener I can be with my kids or my wife. And so I'll stop myself. When I'm leading at my best, I will stop myself and say, hey, Stephen, you're triggered. You're feeling anxious around time. You're not listening, right? So slow down, take a deep breath, pause, and get out of the box, right? And deepen. And when I have the presence of mind to do that, it's a powerful shift. And so my invitation for all of us is think about what that pattern for you might be, because we all have them. When do you get triggered? When do you stop listening? And what can you do to really start to listen deeper? When the context requires it.
Right. And I love how you mentioned triggers because we all have them. And
Mm.
part of the journey in life is discovering and noticing what they are and reducing the impact, right? Because it's not that they necessarily ever truly go away in its entirety, or we would be robots. We're human beings. Things will bother us and things will be brought up. But the idea is, can we reduce when we, like you were saying, those destructive emotions, when we're handling them in destructive ways, can we reduce the impact on the people that we love? Because we all have good intentions and we all want to create great experiences with those that we love, with those that we work with those that we're in community with. But a big part of that is really understanding and tuning into ourselves and listening to not only the things that we love, but the things that we know can get us in that state where we could perhaps use those destructive strategies that
Mm.
give the action, the intended result that we didn't intend.
Mm. I love that you use the word destructive. As a musician, one of the areas I get a lot of energy is this idea of creating. And I
Yeah.
love that you use this word destructive because I think we all have experienced and fall victim to that pattern of destructive leadership. And it might come out in the form of being defensive or argumentative or judgmental or, in conflict, whatever that looks like,
Mhm.
right? So for me, is what I love to tap into is the polar opposite, right? So going into a place of possibility and abundance and creation and laughter as an antidote, right, to that destruction. And I think for all of us, we can find that way to shift from that dark energy to a very positive, curious, abundant energy.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting when we talk about leadership, right? And the impact that our leadership has, not just within our work, but beyond that, because our children start to pick up on some of the strategies that we're using and how we're dealing with our own triggers. And eventually they end up having their own too. And they revert back to the familiar and comfortable strategies that they know and that
Mm.
they may have learned. And this is an opportunity every day with how we are practicing tuning into ourselves and understanding how we can become better listeners and show we are better listeners to create that ripple effect that we really want. And I think at the end of the day, it's how do we consciously help create a better impact for everyone that we touch.
I love that you're underlining this idea of impact. One of the metaphors that I like to play with is that of ourselves as leaders and, let's say, audiences around us, right? So the audience could be our family at home, our audience could be our team at work, the audience could be our community. And being very, as a good listener, identifying the impact that we're having on our audience and reflecting, was that my intended impact? And
Mm,
look, we'll have great days and we'll have difficult days, right? So being compassionate, saying, okay, I was not leading at my best. I did not have the impact that I wanted. So what will I do about that? And
yeah.
coming back almost like an act two or a song two, saying, you know what?
Mm.
I'd like to come back to my audience and practice very intentionally creating a shifted dynamic, right?
You bring up such a great point, right? Because sometimes, as when we throw around words like leaders, people feel like we have to be this perfect person with the perfect responses and have all the answers, and that is far from the truth. And for many who are listening, as they're engaging with, okay, how do I become a better leader who listens in a more engaged way? But when I do create the an impact that I didn't intend by not listening engagedly, how can I go back and recover from that? How
Mhm.
can I go back and bring that conversation up? What do I do then?
Mhm. You know, yeah, it draws me to in music. Um, there's this idea, particularly it comes out of certain styles like jazz, that I love to point to as a metaphor for recovery. And in music, it's a technique that we know as improvisation. And
Mhm.
as an example, there's a very famous jazz musician in the U.S. that many of your listeners will know. His name was Miles Davis, incredibly famous jazz trumpeter, and he was emblematic of this idea of improvisation. And I think we as leaders can learn a lot because he had this quote, and he said, "There are no wrong notes. There are no wrong notes." And his point was that we can look at ourselves as leaders in many ways as shifting from good bad to, oh, I tried something, it didn't land in the way that I wanted, so I'm going to try something different. Right. So this idea that we can take from jazz is that we listen, we try something, and then we build and adapt based on what we notice the impact was, and we keep continuing forward.
Very true. And I think that's something that brings us peace in knowing that there will always be a way to repair and to recover. And that's part of the process. And so I'm curious, how does that look like for you today with Adira Labs? I think it's so interesting what you're doing and the parallels that you're drawing, but more so how you were able to connect a passion that you had from a very young age to the work that you dedicated your life to and now create an impact on a whole nother level with organizations.
Hmm. Thank you for the question. I'll be super transparent by saying, for me, the way it occurred was, I guess, in the context of sometimes the things that are so obvious and are right in front of us, we don't see ourselves. And so, as it related to me, as I was making my career shift into leadership development, and I was putting together my thoughts of my leadership practice, it was actually somebody very close to me, my wife, who metaphorically banged me on the head and said, "Hey, Stephen, why haven't you found a way to integrate your passion for music?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Wow, you're right. That's like right in front of my face, and I had not thought about that." So I think for all of us, we may have these opportunities that are present, and we're blind to them in some ways. So uh, you know, the lesson for me was to listen to those around me to get some reflections about opportunity. So as I then took that feedback, I started experimenting in very practical ways by integrating content that I was putting out online, integrating in terms of my coaching sessions, things like that. And then I listened again and saw a huge resonance. Like the clients that I supported, the teams are like, "Oh my God, this is so cool. What about this? What about this? What about this?" And I would continue to kind of listen and adapt and observe and shape based on that. So for me, this idea of constantly listening and adapting has been very powerful, and I continue to practice that, particularly seeking out individuals from all walks of life. And I would encourage all of the listeners today to think about how you might listen in your own journey.
That's a big one, especially right now when the narrative of our stories are becoming louder and louder when we face a big challenge like COVID. And it's something that we're sharing around the world, and we are getting noise from every direction. So now more than ever, the skill of listening is critical.
Yeah. And I would offer perhaps a somewhat challenging question for all of us in this COVID world, which is incredibly difficult. As a philosophy major and as a coach, I love questions, right? So the
Yep.
question I've been asking myself during COVID is the provocative question is, what is COVID asking of us right now? As
Mm,
leaders, as family members, as members of our community? What is it asking of us? And I think the answer for all of us may be different, but I think the power is rather than fighting it, pushing back, trying to, and being in a place of conflict and scarcity, saying, what is it? What is it trying to offer me? In my case, I'll be very practical. I think it asked me, and I'm answering by saying it's giving me an opportunity to spend more time with loved ones. It's giving me a time to really think about what's important. It's giving me the reminder of how precious life is, and it's also reminding me the ability and the importance of adapting. Not saying it's easy. I'm saying that in
yes.
my case is kind of how I'm reflecting on that question I posed. And I think for all of us, it goes back to this idea of listening in this context.
That's a great question for everyone to reflect on. And it's actually a great segue into wrapping up the show, because typically when we wrap up the show, we love to have our guest experts leave our audience with a leadership challenge. So, based on our conversation, and I know you offered a question, but you know what? I'm going to try to grab another one there out of you. What is a challenge that our audience can take on based on our conversation to help evolve their leadership?
So thank you for the prompt. I would say super practical. There's the question and then there's the homework. The question is, what is your pattern as it relates to when you're not listening at your best? We all have them.
Hmm.
And how will you practice in the coming days and weeks improving your listening in those situations?
I love that. And how can our audience learn more about your work and get in contact with you?
Well, thank you. Uh, Please feel free to visit my website, audiralabs.com, and or go to LinkedIn and check me out, Stephen Kolher. And I would love, love, love to connect with your listeners, and happy to answer any follow-up questions that they may have on this topic.
So I'm going to push you a little bit more there to give more info on what you do, Stephen, because I think it's pretty interesting. And we do have a lot of conscious driven organizations who are part of our listening base. And I think that what you bring to the table with the parallels with music is really interesting and different. Can you tell me a little bit more about how does that all play out when an organization says, you know what, we want to help our professionals get better at listening? How do they work with you?
So thank you. So one of our premises, if you will, particularly when we're working with teams and organizations, is um, learning can be most powerful when it's experiential. And so the way, very practically, we bring that forward with teams is we will pick a series of leadership topics and then run them through a series of musical exercises that involve musical instruments in a context that is highly experiential. We've all kind of fallen asleep against PowerPoint slides and really dry leadership training, and so we do the antithesis. And so we will take a topic such as how to improve your listening skills, and we'll do it in a really unique way where we will use techniques from music and using musical instruments to help expand, amplify, if you will, a leader team and organization's leadership skills. No musical training is required. And it's really about learning something in a fun and also at times, expansive way that can be challenging.
That is so interesting. And I'm excited for those who have an opportunity to experience that. So, to our listeners, the ball is in your court. I challenge you to take action, continue the conversations, and reach out to Stephen to partner with him in your leadership journey. You are listening to Flipping the Script, Leadership Beyond the Title. We'll see you on our next episode. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
If you found even the smallest nugget of wisdom in this episode, share it with a friend and your friend will thank you. Let's continue the conversation with like-minded leaders and join us on Facebook at Go Flip the Script. Until next time, I challenge you to incorporate what you learned today to evolve your leadership impact.